pointing to, Clay, so beautifully is a reality that we have experienced. We've done this work in 10 countries over the past 28 years with thousands of people. And there is consistently this theme that women across the globe that we've worked with are generally shocked to discover how wounded men are by the male socialization.
Yeah.
You know, and as Bell Hooks, you know, the writer Bell Hooks puts it, young boys and men are required to self-mutilate parts of their humanity. And if they don't do it, their peers and elders will do it for them.
Yeah.
So there are parts of the natural experience of being human that young boys and men are forced to self-mutilate by the socialization. And that carries a severe price. And with it, the illusion of having more power and more privilege in the patriarchy. And precisely because of that, women have not realized how much men have suffered. On the one side. On the other side, the other thing we constantly hear is men, and they say consistently, I knew these things happened to women. I read in the statistics, I knew, but I had no idea.
Hi, my name is Clay Boykin, and I'm the founder of In Search of the New Compassionate Male. I believe a new compassionate male is emerging as a new archetype, and these programs are for anyone interested in the topic of men and compassion. Since In Search of the New Compassionate Male does not accept any outside advertising, if you like what you hear today and want to support the awakening of the new compassionate male, I invite you to become a patron. Please visit newcompassionatemale.com or my website, clayboykin.com, and click on the Patreon button. My guests today, Cynthia Brix and Will Keepin, are founding directors of the Gender Equity and Reconciliation International Organization. For the past 28 years, the organization's focus has been in the new field of transformational healing and reconciliation between women and men. Gender equity and reconciliation recognizes the profound wound in the human family constellation around cultural conditioning related to gender, sexuality, and relational intimacy. The gender wound is manifest in many forms in virtually every society across the planet. And it's my privilege to have Cynthia and Will with us on In Search of the New Compassionate Male. Join us now for that conversation.
Hello, world. It's me, Dennis, and we are in search of the new compassionate male. I'm the producer of this podcast, and we're here with the founder of the movement, Clay Boykin. Clay, would you introduce our guests, Will and Cynthia, please?
Absolutely. It's absolutely my pleasure. And I'm referencing back to the introduction we did beforehand, so this is going to be very brief here. Cynthia and Will I met in 2018 at the Parliament of the World's Religions, and within minutes, I knew that these were people that I wanted to get close with. And because of what we're doing with In Search of the New Compassionate Male, their work in the area of gender equity and reconciliation, I just can't say enough about it. I've got all kinds of notes here and mind maps, things that I want us to talk about. And I say, let's roll. Let's get this going.
Absolutely. Here we are, September of 2020. It feels as if that the world has been disrupted in such a profound way that allows something to arise. Can you talk about how that is in the gender reconciliation movement and how that it is, what it feels to us and everything that we've seen with you is that this is the timing, the perfect timing for this to really take the roots that it needs to do?
Well, one would hope that's true. It's been had its moments along the historic line of humanity to have its time, and somehow it will come up and then it fades away again. So, and I think that's the nature of many things, that maybe the human condition, maybe the systems that are in place, the powers that be that want to keep things as the status quo and keep things pushed down. And so we're seeing this uprising and this, as you said, and this stirring and this explosive times that, at times very explosive in our country of the United States, but worldwide. And so one can look at that in all kinds of ways. And coming from, I will say, as a white woman in the United States, in a comfortable life for the most part, I can see it as an exciting time, an important time, a time we have been waiting for sure. And it's also a time of great suffering for people around the world, whether we're talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, whether we're talking about from the pandemic, domestic violence worldwide has risen, and people are not safe in their homes, many people, and they don't have places to go for help. The hotlines for domestic violence agencies are just overwhelmed by the numbers being called in. And then we have, of course, racial and cultural tensions, religious tensions. So it's like everything is just up. And it is an opportunity for us to look at it. And I do feel personally that we will move through it. And it doesn't mean we aren't going to suffer through it, but, and myself included. There's great suffering in my heart for everything that's happening. And my work in gender equity and reconciliation is one way that I feel like it's kind of like spiritual activism, because underpinning my life and what's the foundation is the spiritual, the contemplative of coming from that place of the deep faith that I have in what we're here for, and yet the action in the world of what's needed right now for us to actually not sit back and but to show up and in the ways that we're supposed to make a difference.
And I certainly see this as a movement, as Clay and I, you and I have talked about this so much, is that we grew up in a world that was zero sum, and that to me is the very definition of the patriarchy. If I have to give something up, it has to come out of my piece of the pie, and there's only so much pie, and that's within that structure, and within it's built that way. And we all know, we've seen the synergy that the world, that it is greater than the sum of its parts, that there is more than enough for all of us to go around, all that we're taking. And this seems to be addressing in gender reconciliation the original sin. We're getting into that place of deep healing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Even before COVID, as Cynthia said, which has only amplified some of the gender dynamics and gender domestic violence taking place. But even before COVID, we know the statistics are 1 in 3 women worldwide have been sexually or physically abused in their lifetime. And women have been systematically exploited and oppressed, as nakedly revealed from the Me Too movement. So 3/3 of women and girls have been psychologically and spiritually oppressed and abused. So we have a systemic injustice here, visited upon half of humanity that has been really largely ignored until the last century or so. I mean, even the United Nations didn't really address it until 1993. And when they finally had a conference about it, and that led to the Beijing conference in 1995. And when Trump was elected, the Women's March was the largest single protest in the history of humanity. I think it was 68 countries. So we definitely, as you said, we are opening with a whole new depth and intensity of when we're grappling, we're not just opening, we are in this period of very profound social upheaval and transformation. And so there is, as in Chinese, danger and opportunity go together in a crisis. And we are in a crisis in which there's great danger, but profound, unprecedented opportunity for transforming these things. And what we're very inspired to see in our work is that women and men and all gender categories are rising up to demand this transformation and are showing up in greater numbers for our work than ever before. So it's a very auspicious time while also being a very kind of quite challenging and dangerous time.
You know, I think about this when women are the victims of family violence, the perpetrators of the violence are wounding as they perpetuate the violence. It damages the souls of both.
It's very true. It's that wonderful statement that hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
Injured people injure other people. No human being likes pain, and we need a place to place it. And when one has been injured, if one is unconscious, one then spreads that injury to others.
God. You know, Clay, you've talked about that when you have talked with women who said, I didn't know that men were wounded by the patriarchy or had this, right?
Yeah, and it was through the workshops that I've been involved with Cynthia and Will, and it was my first time that I had witnessed a woman standing and expressing her woundedness, and then a man expressing his woundedness, and the lights coming on for the women that the men are wounded too through the patriarchy. It's a whole dynamic that I was never conscious of until engaging with the work that Cynthia and Will are doing.
Yeah, it's often the case that, as Clay's describing, that we hear so much about the violence against girls and women. It is a pandemic, worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
And so we almost become, I think most of us become kind of callous to it, or, oh, okay, that's the norm. And the flip side of that is that men are suffering too from the same system, and boys and men haven't and aren't in many ways allowed to speak of their pain and suffering. There are programs that allow that now, but even then, the majority of men don't feel like they have permission. It's been trained out of them in many ways, act like a man, don't cry, these things that are messages worldwide and to boys. And then, when we get into a cross-gender dialogue or activity or conversation, the women often are surprised to see that men have been abused by, other men, which is even higher
Yes.
in rates than male to female violation. And then also by their partners, wives, mothers, women that have
Husbands, male partners.
Yeah. And it's not equal, and it's not the same as violence against women or the violations there, but it's still very present. And really, in our society, we have demanded, I say the royal we, by the system,
Yes.
demanded that men give up their humanity.
Dennis, I have to share this, that at the Parliament, I had the opportunity to be part of something called silent witnessing. And that right there, that one exercise within a few minutes changed my world. It absolutely turned things upside down. And I'm just wondering if you all will share about it, because I'll stumble through it and it chokes me up to even, reflect on it. But,
Please do. I got a mini chance to, I attended one of your workshops, so I got a mini chance to experience it, but I would love to hear it from how it developed and what this process is.
Yeah, well, silent witnessing is one of the activities we do, and some of you in the listening audience may have experienced this around racial injustice, or racial justice, I think is a better term for the programs you might have been through, where you stand for particular questions that are true for you. And so in our process of gender reconciliation, we do that process. And one question that we ask of the women and then the men is, for the women, have you ever feared that, let me remember, have you ever been afraid to walk the streets alone because you are a woman? And pretty much every woman stands for that question.
And then we ask the question to the men, have you ever been afraid to walk the streets alone because you were a man? And usually almost no man stands for it.
Now, I will say that African-American men in the United States in particular might stand for that question, because it's both their gender and their race that is causing them to fear walking the streets alone, right? Or walking the streets at all.
One of the things that impacted me was some of the questions that were asked, and it was my first opportunity to stand and for someone to see me. Just that act of standing, and for the women to witness silently, oh, you're wounded too. That was where it started. That's told me, it told me that this is incredibly important work. And it was that one exercise there that said, I'm coming out. I'm doing this. And the next week I was on the airplane out there. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You were.
I flew home from Toronto, repacked my bags, and headed right out there. And that's where
what you're pointing to, Clay, so beautifully is a reality that we have experienced. We've done this work in 10 countries over the past 28 years with thousands of people. And there is consistently this theme that women across the globe that we've worked with are generally shocked to discover how wounded men are by the male socialization.
Yeah.
And as Bell Hooks, the writer Bell Hooks puts it, young boys and men are required to self-mutilate parts of their humanity. And if they don't do it, their peers and elders will do it for them.
Yeah.
So there are parts of the natural experience of being human that young boys and men are forced to self-mutilate by the socialization. And that carries a severe price. And with it, the illusion of having more power and more privilege in the patriarchy. And precisely because of that, women have not realized how much men have suffered. On the one side. On the other side, the other thing we constantly hear is men, as it's sometimes said, men have a lot of data, but they don't have a clue.
Yeah, it's so true.
Of course, that's like a feminist joke. But what happens is men themselves come and they say consistently, I knew these things happened to women. I read in the statistics, I knew, but I had no idea.
Yeah.
I'll give you one example. We had a man who's been leading men's work for 30 years. He came to one of our programs, 30-year veteran of really doing beautiful men's work, leader really in the Mankind Project, one of the leading men's groups. he came to one of our programs in January, February, just before COVID. And he, like Clay, he heard stories, he just curled his ears at what the women had been subjected to, the world they live in, what they had experienced as girls, as women, at all these different levels, subtle levels and egregious violations. And he went home to his wife, who he'd been married to for more than 30 years, and said, I was just so blown away. And I said, I'm so glad those things never happened to you. And she said, what do you mean they never happened to me? And she told her story to her husband for the first time after more than 30 years of marriage. So these things are kept untold, and untold stories keep oppression invisible and enable it to continue. That is the central way that it is all perpetrated. That's the reason that the institutions and the violators are at such pains to keep it hidden. All the Harvey Weinsteins, all the universities and media organizations that keep it secret, and all the non-disclosure agreements and payoffs of millions of dollars to keep it quiet, because nothing can withstand the power of truth. And we have found in our work, after 30 years working with thousands of people in 10 countries, that this patriarchal conditioning cannot withstand the twin powers of truth and love. And that, as we sometimes say, patriarchy is thousands of years old, but it's only 4 days deep. Mm-hmm. Because you gather a skillful gathering of men and women, and you get to that level of truth telling, and those shackles of iron become clay and begin to just fall away.
It's so true. And what I very quickly learned, because I thought, we're comparing wounds here. This isn't comparing whose wound is worse. That has nothing to do with it. It's just the sheer nature of the fact that we're both wounded. And what I'm coming to learn is that that's our common ground.
And there really aren't two wounds. There's two aspects of one wound. And we are living out different parts of one wound. And that's what people discover. That's what the research has shown on our work in South Africa. As the men and women excavate their gendered experiences, and they realize, oh my God, we've all been betrayed by the same conditioning. And the very conditioning that trained men to be sexist and entitlement and insensitive towards women is the very thing that women have lived out on the receiving end. And all of that is a training. And nobody wants it. What people realize is, I didn't really want this. We never had a choice. No one ever asked us to sign on the bottom. Yes, I would like to be trained how to be, a sexist, entitled man who basically disrespects women without even realizing it. I'm going to sign up for that. What we always find in our work is that men, the vast majority of men, there are a few exceptions, of course, but the vast majority of men deeply long for a respectful, honoring, mutual relationship of integrity with the feminine, with themselves, with women and girls. They don't know how to do it. They don't see role models. They've had no training.
Yeah.
Well, it's just the opposite, because what I learned in Kenya was, they grow up in 12, 13, 14, and they go through the ritual of becoming a man, they're taken out, they're publicly circumcised, they go through 6 or 8 weeks of indoctrination school. Yesterday you were a boy, today you're a man, and you no longer talk to your mother. And it starts there. But everybody's doing it. When I was there, I saw a news report. This season, 20,000 young men will go through the rites of passage. I can't remember what they called it specifically. 20,000. And then the whole country is putting together things to support this patriarchal process. That's how deep it goes. And every fellow that was in my circle there, Dennis, there were 20 some odd. I said, so how many of you all went through this? And co-facilitator looked at me and says, every one of them but one. And I said, who was that one? He said, you.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Clay, that's how widespread it is currently. But think about the generations back, right?
Absolutely.
And the body memory the cellular memory in us, whether we know it or not. Even
Absolutely.
if we started, even if our parents and our grandparents were doing it differently, then it's still there from our ancestors, right? That's feeding through. And while you're mentioning Kenya, I mean, we have the same kinds of systems in different forms right here in the United States or in the West, about how a boy or a man gets initiated sexually, and girls too, how we're taught how to be sexual or not taught how to be sexual with each other. And just, I mean, one thing that comes up in our programs too, it's always come up, but it's especially coming up now, is pornography, and how it has destroyed relationships. Now, that's not a moral statement against erotic sexuality. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the industry that's pouring in the pictures and images and the films that are teaching people, and primarily boys and men as young as 5 years old and on up, how to be sexual. And then they get into a relationship with a young woman, and really don't know how to be in intimate relationship, because it's just poured into them about sex. And often nowadays, it's very violent sex that comes through in the pornographic films. And again, I'm not making a moral statement here, a judgment. And it's not a place, it's kind of like alcoholism. It's anything that's hooking us in. And the pornographic industry has really hooked us in. And there aren't any or many healthy models of how to be sexual beings with one another. And that's what we're lacking. And that's what I think we're longing for this deep intimacy with each other, whether it's sexual or not. But the sexual being in us is also longing for those healthy, intimate relationships with one another.
Can you, Cynthia and Will, can you look back over the last 30 years and take some snapshots of how people are reacting, being in the workshops, how are you seeing an evolution as the world begins to be more diverse in the media, more diverse? Are you seeing impacts? Is there a shortening of a time from when people arrive to when they begin to get more vulnerable than they were before? Are you seeing any differences over these last 30 years that you can apply as general statements as to how the world is ready for the work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Certain trends, absolutely. One of them that's very heartening is that more and more men are coming to our work, and they're more prepared to do it than they were 20, 30 years ago. They're more emotionally and consciously, emotionally intelligent and engaging from a place of sincerity, as opposed to we just had fewer men coming, and they were less emotionally prepared to engage in the work 30 years ago when we started. So that's a very auspicious change, a good change. On the other side, there's sometimes a tendency to think that, India, South Africa, Kenya, we work in those places, they're the ones with the real gender problems. In some of the Islamic countries, we here in the West, we're really advanced. I was at and that's just not the case. I was at a conference in San Diego, San Jose, California. High level science and non-duality, maybe you know of it. It's a very prominent conference. And I was on a panel with Charles Eisenstein and a couple of others. And it was all about the male and transforming male consciousness. And there were probably 300 people in the room. And I asked a question in the form of silent witnessing. I just asked a question first for the men. Please raise your hand if at any time in the last 2 weeks you have taken specific preventative measures to avoid becoming the potential victim of sexual assault. Not one hand went up. I asked the same question of the women. Over 100 hands went up. And there was a visible gasp, an audible gasp, I mean, well, and visible.
Mm-hmm.
And from that one difference, I said, men and women live in different worlds. And this is just as true here in the developed, advanced West as it is in India and South Africa. Maybe it's more incidents there than here, but it's here. And we really need to take it seriously and transform this culture, because one of the things that men discover in our work that I am so heartened by is they discover that the greatest male privilege is none of the advantages that are afforded to men in a patriarchal society. The greatest male privilege is to actively participate in deconstructing that unjust system itself. Because then they are actually contributing to building a new world. They are both freeing themselves from those shackles and having the great privilege and great work of freeing others from those shackles. And so to me, it's an incredible privilege to be able to do this kind of work. And that's why we're scaling it up now. We're taking it to scale because we know that people want this and they don't even know it's out there. It's something that's needed everywhere, yet exists at this point almost nowhere still.
I want to just also highlight, I think we can see this and the audience can see it. I mean, we are all older, we're white, we're, I think all of us from the United States. So I just want to name that, bring it out, obvious
Thank you.
And in our program, in our work, in our community, we're really a community of practitioners. Of course, it is a program of Gender Equity and Reconciliation International. And as we get to work together and be together, we have become a strong, bonded community worldwide. And as that community, we are all different faces. We're different ethnic backgrounds, different skin color, different genders, different sexual orientations. And so I just want to name that piece, that Will and I represent one piece of the pie.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
we do, but I also want to call out that because, and Clay, you and I have discussed this how often, right? The fact that we are white males and the privilege that we continue to experience over the entire course of our lives, and the accumulation of wealth and power that has been concentrated in the white male population of this planet, means that we need to be part of the solution. We cannot just stand back and go, well, you know, we have to own our part and also be part of this solution going forward. Isn't that what we talk about, Clay?
Yeah, and I just go back to our conversation with Gar Jameson, and you know, tremendously accomplished person and has done tremendous work in association with the Charter for Compassion and with other organizations there in the Nevada area. And he says, yeah, I know my white privilege, and my role is to use that white privilege to change things, to bring that to bear, to affect change and to help make things better. I recognize that I've got that. This isn't about tearing me down. That's not what this is about. It's let's make this change. And what you were talking about earlier about, the pie,
Yeah.
being honest, no, this isn't about, you got to tear the white privileged guy down so that the people of color or so, can come up. No, we both rise and everything gets bigger. And so that's just the
Richer
tone that you enrich. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where this is what I loved what you're doing, is because you are helping me to continue to work on my emotional body and my spiritual body, to expand it to in areas that I would not have even known were there, did I not participate in the work that you're doing? Did I not have a chance to ask myself questions that have to do with that I cannot even see? They're my unconscious biases, and until I address them and we get there, do I even know that they're there? And that's, my goodness, I'm so proud and delighted to meet you two face to face and to get this opportunity to be able to talk about this so importantly.
Yeah.
Well,
And
thank
you,
you. That's
yeah.
beautiful. And actually, what you said is, we often do hear that. We at one of the events we did for the United Nations gender equality activists recently, there was a woman there who said at the end, she said to the men after they had brought forth their deep truth, she said, "What you have spoken has opened my heart in a way that I didn't even know it was closed." So it opened her to the closeness of her heart, and then opened that closedness as well. So, yeah.
You know, it's incredible. I mean, to that point specifically, to be able to create that space, that sacred space, a safe space, setting that container for men and women to come together is golden. And Cynthia and Will, you talk about coming together and an alchemy occurring. You know, that hearing this in this spirit and in this way, in this nurturing way, there's no way someone can come away not changed. It's just an alchemy that occurs there. And I feel it. I'm still trying to put words to it, as you can tell, but it's deep and it is changing.
You know, Rumi, the wonderful poet, where he says, "Thought gives off smoke to prove the existence of fire. The mystic sits within the burning." So what we do in this work is it is alchemical, because we come together and we go into the gender womb together. Of course, we set the stage very carefully, and we spend a lot of time creating the safety and the conditions and the ground rules, not just the behavioral rules, but the spiritual container for it. And we spend, importantly, we create that in that context, but then we go into the shadow, into the difficulties, into the darkness. But what happens is, and it's painful, but we're holding that pain with and for one another, and that makes it so much more bearable. And then what happens is we move through, and that fire, we are sitting in the burning, but then what happens is that those flames of burning burn away the veils, burn away the imperfections, and burn away the karma, and we come into a whole new place of seeing one another soul to soul and realizing our foundational unity. And this is where we started, and this is the promise of where we can come back to, if we can but release these shackles that we have been taking as chains of steel, and they are not. They are simply chains of clay held up by falsehood and darkness. And the minute we bring light and truth to them, they crumble.
Yeah.
I'm so glad. Sunlight actually for me has always been the only disinfectant, right? That truly gives an opportunity to be able to, and because these, I love how you phrase that, because these these chains cannot stand the test of light. Once they are exposed, we can no longer pretend that they work and that the world is working in this way. And then we have to stand. Cynthia and Will, would you talk about how in this In Search of the New Compassionate Male, and what Clay and I have been on, and Clay has started and I have joined him, is that it is both an external work, but it's also an internal work that I must raise and grow the archetype of the compassionate male within me, as well as the divine feminine, that balance that has been out of balance in me, and that working on it within each one of us. And can you talk about this in relation to how you see men and compassion, and how that how, as we are in search, finding you of course is exactly what we needed to do. Can you talk about that process, please?
What's coming to me, Dennis, as you're speaking, I don't know if this will go where you're intending, but I'll just take it where it's going.
Please.
I often, by the way, Will and I are a married couple. My mother came to a program 25 years ago, and she came home to one of Will's programs called Gender and Ecology at that time. And the subtitle is, Are There Parallels Between the Exploitation of the Feminine and the Exploitation of the Earth? And she came back from that program, and she said to my brother, my sister-in-law, and me, we were all adults, she said, I want to gift you by sending you to this program. And for everything I messed up in your life, this work will heal you. My brother and sister-in-law went right away. They had a fabulous experience. It took me 5 years to get to the program. For whatever reason, things would come up in life, but when I came, it was perfect timing, of course. And it took another 5 years. I mean, Will and I were doing our lives, and there's a whole love story there, a whole story of not crossing boundaries and everything else, and just becoming really good friends. And then after 5 years longer, then we realized this friendship was more than that. And so we became a intimate couple and married. And what I'll say to you is that in my own personal life, we often hear people refer to their partner, their husband, wife, wife, this is my other half. Or better half. I would say Will and I are two wholes coming together. And that does not mean we're perfect.
Spelled with a W.
Yeah. That doesn't mean we're
Right.
perfect or that we're not still growing, but we're whole enough in ourselves to meet each other. And I think that comes, in life and through the different relationships we find ourselves. And that's when I first came to the program, I didn't know what my masculine side was. It was just like, I can't even relate to that. And I hear others saying that. I don't know what my feminine side is. How do I find it? And there's this self-exploration that has to go on. And for me, it is through the spiritual practices that I bring forward in my life. It's through getting therapy when needed. It's through experiential processes. It's all these things. And it's doing that ruthless, compassionately ruthless self-exploration always. And eventually maturing and evolving into a place that when I come into partnership, not only with my beloved here, but anyone, male to, other men, other women, any human being of any gender, I can meet them in the wholeness of my being. And through that meeting, I find more of myself and hopefully give more to that person. One last piece of this is when I was a little girl, well, not only then, but still, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was a hero of mine. I grew up in the 60s and in the US, and my parents were very involved in the civil rights movement, or otherwise known as the freedom movement. And when, as a little girl, I was a little 2 years old or something or 3 years old when I first heard I Have a Dream, the famous speech of King. And the one piece that resonated as a little girl is him saying, when, white girls and boys with black girls and boys, brown, yellow, all the different races can hold hands together. You know, that image for me, that's what it's about. That's when we'll come in to wholeness, if you will. I'm putting words of what was meaningful to me, of what I heard from him. And then suddenly, just, 5 or 6 years ago, so, well, let me back up. In a little girl way, I held a prayer that would become true. Now, I didn't relate it, but I just thought, yes, that's my vision for a healed world as a little girl. And I held a prayer in the sense of, the more people that I meet that are different from me, whether they're men, whether they're gender fluid, whether they're black, white, brown, the more people I meet, the more I will know God, the more I will know the ultimate reality, the more I will find myself. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I was sitting in South Africa in circle. And I looked around the circle, and there was the Rainbow Republic, as they're known, right before my face, with race, culture, gender, age, all right there. And that prayer in my heart had become reality. Not of my doing, ultimately, but just by being and keeping on the aspiration and the longing to become whole by knowing others.
Oh, Cynthia. Oh, well, yeah. Look at the smile on Clay's face, because I know what's going on in his head and heart. What the gracefulness of this experience, because what you were talking about the about the rainbow and knowing this is what it feels like to me in 2020. It feels like that there has been. How would we ever know when the tipping point actually happened? When do you go past that point at a black hole where you cannot come back? If we're going to use a quantum physics metaphor, or to whatever, take two metaphors, mix well. But if we're going to, something appears to me to have happened, that we are past that tipping point and that we've gone, that point of no return where you cannot go back. Are you guys feeling that? Are you keeping that? Am I merely deluding myself? Help, because I do that well. Help me to know.
Well, I'll mention here the work of Richard Tarnas. I don't know if you know the work of Richard Tarnas, who wrote a book called Cosmos and Psyche. But what he has done is looked at historical periods of transformation and human social and cultural evolution. And to make a long story short, from his analysis, yes, we have gone beyond. We are in new territory. He actually correlates it with the seasons of archetypal cosmology. So this gets very intricate and quite remarkable. And what he's doing there is a form of what has traditionally been called one of the, what is the term I've heard? But dishonored sciences, known as astrology. So astrology has been sort of dismissed completely. And what Rick Tarnas has shown is a remarkable correlation of periods of history with certain planetary archetypes and combinations. And he shows, for example, that in the 1960s, there was a certain rare planetary combination, which is now happening again. And that's how he understands the correlation between these two periods. But it all has to do with an intensity of liberation, cultural transformation, and rebirth, rebirthing and regenerating. And coming in with that is this whole process of purification that we are really in the throes of. So, but I think it is correct to say, at least from his analysis, and I think even from historical analyses, I mean, we are really in unprecedented time. We really have gone over a certain threshold. And again, there's a lot of danger in that, but there's incredible opportunity. So it's very important for us to hold that opportunity and to use this very fluid moment to dream the future that we want into reality, to take that dream and make it concrete. And I have to say, our work has so touched me. I mean, if there's one thing I've learned, I have a greater confidence in the human spirit than anything, because we have seen people coming in with the most dysfunctional attitudes and the deepest wounds, and coming through after doing this work for a period. Sometimes it's several of them, several programs, where they stay engaged for a few years, but we've seen a whole shift in transformation into a place of open-hearted embrace and the power of the spirit to heal us. If we will open ourselves and let it do its work on its terms, rather than trying to direct it, I mean, it's unbelievable what's possible.
As we would, I know, Clay, we want to do this again. But for now, is there anything on your two hearts that we haven't shared that you want to share on this day at the beginning of September of 2020 that we have not talked about?
Well, I'd like to tell a short story because I think this might have a place in the work. I've told this before, but haven't told it today. We were working, and just to give an example of how the work works, in one of our programs, we had at one point a very powerful retelling of a story from one of the women about a brutal rape that she had experienced. And she told it in a way that was really bearing witness to the experience that a woman goes through in that extreme situation. And it was mind-blowing. And it was particularly for the men. None of the men had ever heard a woman tell a story like that. And one of the men afterwards said, because there was a deep silence afterwards, and of course, there was a lot of pain and tears, but when we came through the tears, we just sat in silence together. And he broke the silence by saying, "I don't know how to be a man anymore. I feel traumatized." And so this was in South Africa, in a culture of extreme gender-based violence. And he basically sat there shaking, and we worked with him and helped him to come to understand that the reason he felt traumatized was because he had now taken some of this woman's pain into his own heart. So he was now carrying a part of her pain in his heart. And that created a bridge between hearts that was transforming both. And so she was transformed by the power of sharing her story and having it skillfully and compassionately witnessed. And his tremendous empathic and compassionate faculties were awakened to the point that he just couldn't be the man he was before. And that became a turning point in his life. And a year later, he entered our training and went through our whole training. And now he's one of our facilitators in South Africa who's taking this work out to others. So that's just an example of how the work can transform people, and then they want to go out and be an instrument of that transformation for others.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Cynthia.
I'd like to say one thing, Dennis, and I know we're at the top of the hour, so I hear it over and over and over again from women who enter into our program, and they're unsure about the men for their own reasons, justifiable reasons, and the men too. The men are unsure about coming into our program because they don't know if it's going to be male bashing and what they're going to get from the women. And it isn't male bashing. It is, there's not shaming and blaming. It's really coming into a place of deep listening, compassionate heart. It doesn't mean we don't get into the depth of the sharing and real sharing, which is hard to hear sometimes, but it's not anything on some level that we don't hear in the news anyway. But here it is, a person sitting in front of me sharing their story, and that makes it another level more difficult, I think. But I hear women say, and I say this, we need the men. We can't do this by ourselves. And I hear men say, we need the women. And of course, that's within, male and female. We need each other is the ultimate piece, and we need to come together. There's not a better time. We opened with this place of you asking Dennis, about this time and everything that's rising. We've got to do it. We need to do it. We're past the tipping point, and it's time. There is no other time. And so we welcome you, whoever's listening, and with open arms, and come join us, because it, as Clay has already described in his own touched heart, his heartfelt way, that this is a beloved community that you've been waiting for, that we've all been waiting for.
And now you can join us online. You can do our courses online.
That's right.
So you
No
can
matter
do it
where
from
you
the
are.
very place you're sitting right now.
I wanted to highlight that too, and I'll do it in the introduction. But you've got some courses coming up here in a couple of weeks. You have two of them.
And it's
Good.
two of them. One that is our general program for English speaking, and one that's Spanish speaking. So yeah.
How wonderful. Well, we will make sure that those are highlighted, and links are highlighted to anyone that goes on there will be on that. Cynthia, thank you so much, you open-hearted human being. Will, bless your heart. I give you a virtual hug to all of it. Clay, I hug you all the time, so I'm going to give you one too, as we'll have this. And thank you, everyone, and thank you, audience. And until next time, we will see you in search of the new compassionate male.